Live. Pass it off to you, Lucas. Hello. Oh wait, actually, sorry, I don't mean to cancel you, Lucas. I think we may not be sharing audio, which is not good. Let me fix that. We should be sharing an audio. We should have an audio output capture here, but let me see why that's not working. Um, yeah, wait, just double checking. Can the chat hear me? While I fix this. Yeah, oh, yeah. Thanks for catching that. By the way. Okay, yeah. So that means it's sharing my audio. I'm using OBS. It's sharing my audio. For whatever reason, audio output capture is not capturing Lucas and Michael. Worst case, I can talk through this entire thing. But let me just double check this first. So this should do this. Here, wait. Here's a sketchy way to make this work. I can do this. Get this. Now I can go and do. Sorry. This. Okay, wait. Wait. Lucas, say something. Okay, no, I don't think it's capturing you. Okay, wait, rip. I can just talk through this. That's okay. We can fix it for tomorrow's session though. Okay, sorry. I'll bring through. Sorry, huge apologies to the chat. I can talk through it. Okay, so we are McMaster Competitive Programming, and I'm here joined with Lucas and Michael today. Although you may not be able to hear them, they are here. Uh, so on our executive team, we've got me, we've got our VP Finance, Lucas, and we've got Michael running events and training. And so, first off, just a bit of background on competitive programming. Competitive programming often gets confused with hackathons, just because in a hackathon, you go somewhere for like normally like 2 or 3 days, and you have to like solve some sort of like broad, ambiguous problem. But it is programming, and it is like somewhat competitive, so it could be easily confused. However, competitive programming normally refers to these competitions where you're given a small set of very short, specific problems, and you have to write solutions within a time limit. And this time limit is normally pretty short, like it's anywhere from maybe like 2 to 5 hours. And there's many existing sites where users can go to compete and try and solve these questions, such as the more competitive programming focused ones are sites like Codeforces and Topcoder, but there are other more interview focused ones like LeetCode and HackerRank that are also quite popular. Now, when you hear the term programming problem, that might sound kind of weird. Like what actually is that? So this is normally just like a textual description of an everyday problem, and this will make more sense with an example. But it could be like really any program that they could give you some like textual description of. So a good example might be perhaps they give you some input that gives you the layout of like a city, for example, and you have to find the shortest path from some starting location to some ending location. That might be like a somewhat typical competitive programming problem. And so in general, you always will receive some input, and you need to write a program that'll take that input and translate it into some desired output. And we can actually look at an example here. We're going to solve a quick HackerRank problem called min-max sum. So this site that I'm on right now is HackerRank. It was one of the sites we mentioned earlier. So while this site does have competitive programming questions, it's like very largely skewed towards interview preparation. And this is like one of those particular programming problems I mentioned. You'll see right away, we start off with a description up here, and then down below we've got, I guess, a detail, more of a detailed description of the input and output formats. So starting with the description, we see that in this problem we're given 5 integers, and we want to find the maximum and minimum sums we can make by summing exactly 4 of those 5 integers. So for instance, in this example here, if we were given the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, the smallest sum we can make by summing 4 of them would just be by summing the 4 smallest elements, which would be 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7, which would give us 16. Now similarly, if you want to make the biggest possible sum, we could do the 4 biggest elements, which would be 3 plus 5 plus 7 plus 9. And now you'll see down here we have a description of the inputs. So we see our input format is just a single line of space-separated integers. So they're going to give us something that looks like this. And each of our input integers will be constrained from 1 to 10 to the 9, which is all this fancy constraint section is saying. And then as output, we need to just print out the minimum value, followed by a space, and the maximum value. So if we scroll down to the bottom of our page, we can actually write our code to do that. Now, I don't know how familiar everyone is with HackerRank, but on a site like HackerRank, you can actually choose from a variety of languages. So I have it set to Python, but if you're more familiar with Java or C++ or even Golang, you could choose one of those languages. So let's try and solve this problem. For a problem like this, the first thing we want to do is take input. So in Python, if you call input, it'll read a line of input from like the input given to by HackerRank. So this will actually go and just give us as a string this whole first line here. Now HackerRank has a cool built-in thing called .split, which will take a string and split it on spaces. So this will give me a list of space-separated strings, and each of those strings will just be like a string containing 1, a string containing 2, a string containing 3, 4, and 5. Now I want to work with integers, not strings. So luckily, Python has a special function called map, which will take a function and apply it to every element in the sequence. So here, I'm going to take every one of my strings in my list of strings and convert it to an integer. So instead of having like the numbers 1 to 5 in strings, I'll have the numbers 1 to 5 as integers. And then finally, we can cast it to a list, so we can work with it like a regular list. Now, in terms of our actual solution for this problem, there's a few approaches we can take. An approach Lucas mentioned earlier is you can sort it, and we can think, well, if we sort it, then the minimum value we can make is the first 4 elements. So let's go the first 4 elements, so up to and not including the last. And our maximum would be everything, sorry, the last 4 elements, I should say. So it'll be the first element and everything after that. And then finally, we just need to print out our min and our max. So let's see if I made any errors here or if this works. To test your code in HackerRank, you can just scroll to the bottom and press this Run Code button. Oh, and we see we have an error here. Oh, it's because I typed max instead of mx. And we run again, and we see, cool, we got the right answer. Then if we want to run on the real test cases, we can press this Submit Code button here. And just like that, we see, well, we are passing all the test cases, and we've solved like a nice, easy HackerRank question. Now, this problem was kind of easy and like not that interesting to solve, but they can get quite more involved and really quite more interesting. And so I'm going to switch back to the slides now. All right. So I thought it might be fun. I mentioned there was more interesting problems, but I didn't actually tell you guys about any of them. So I thought it might be fun to quickly walk through some problems from past ICPCs. So on the screen right now, you should see a sort of like grid, and on this grid, you're given a bunch of cars. It's like these sort of like weird like oval rectangle things are cars, and the number on them just represents like the label of the car, which is to say like this is car number 8, this is car number 4, yada yada. And how this problem works is given these cars in the grid, you want to see if you can slide the cards in the grid and in such a way that you can uncover the shaded square. And so this is like something we could do conceptually as like human beings. But what's interesting is in a programming contest, you have to write like a computer program to solve this. So I believe, I don't know if Daniel Wolf is watching, but I think he actually has solved this before in the past. You can solve this actually with like a depth first search, which is really cool. But in an actual ICPC contest, you'd be given this grid, like just in like a textual format, and have to read it in, come up with some solution for reordering these cars, and print your output. Another problem, this one was also from like 2018, is this problem here called pizza cutting. Now, this one's sort of fun. Intuitively, when we cut pizza, we normally sort of cut pizza like a cake, right? Like you cut it into normally wedge slices where each wedge has like the same area. So it's really simple. But for the sake of this problem, they want us to cut the pizza into this weird rectangular grid pieces. So the idea is they'll give us like some coordinate of like a grid intersection, and they'll give us the width and height of each one of these rectangles. And based on that, we can construct a grid that would intersect with the circle, and that would give us a bunch of these like weirdly shaped slices of pizza. Now, for this problem, all we have to do, I believe, is you have to return like the number of slices that are beneath like a certain size. But there's a lot of like weird like insights and intricacies with figuring out how to determine, well, say how to intersect like a. It sounds really simple, like to get the intersecting area between a rectangle and like a circle, but it ends up actually being like pretty complex. And in solving this, you can come up with like a general solution for finding like I think we're able to find a way to find, what is it, the intersection between a general convex polygon and a circle, like what their intersection would be. You can come up with a way to do that, and once you can do that, the problem becomes easy. But it's really cool. It's not intuitive. It's like a funky problem. Now, if this seems like a super hard problem too, don't be stressed out. I think 2 teams solved this in 2018. So there are also like much easier questions on ICPC. They're not all like brutal. Okay, talking about brutal questions, this was a question from 2019, so last year. And in this problem, you were given a grid. And on this grid, there are some open spots, some blocked off spots, and some green dots, which we'll refer to as treasure. Now, in this problem, your challenge is you want to see if you can find a way to draw a bunch of squares onto this grid such that each square contains exactly 1 piece of treasure and all squares are filled up. So you can see on this right side here they've done that. And it might be the case that this is actually impossible to do, and you'd have to print if it's impossible. So this is another like very difficult problem, but it's sort of interesting to think about. I thought you might like it. All right. Now, competitive programming problems are pretty cool, but you're like, you're a university student. You're saying like, well, this is cool and all, but I really want a job, right? And if you want a job in the software field, and this day and age, almost all positions force you to do some form of technical interview. Now, this normally involves like solving algorithm questions on the spot. Like it could be in a whiteboard interview where they ask you to write up your solution on the board in pseudocode or perhaps a language of your choice. Or nowadays you can even get like phone interviews where they want you to write your code in a Google Doc, or even just take-home coding challenges, which will either be on platforms like Codility or HackerRank. And so what's cool then, so you have to go through these technical interviews, and it just so happens that the sort of questions that we solve in competitive programming are very similar to the sort of questions you are asked in technical interviews. In fact, Most of the time, they'll be the exact same. Although I will say there are competitive programming questions are really a superset of the technical interviewing questions. So that means though, if you're comfortable with competitive programming, you'll be very comfortable with technical interviewing. And as sort of evidence to that, as a group, we have sent many people to go off either for internships or to pursue full-time opportunities at some of the companies shown here. Now, if you say, well, that's cool and all, jobs are great, but if you just like find like you're doing this and you actually really love competitive programming, it just so happens you can actually compete at this. Like there's a ton of competitions that are held every year, and they're like super fun. So the the most popular competition that we compete in is this thing called ICPC, which is a big international competition for undergrads. And I won't talk too much about this now because we touch more on it later. But this photo in the top right here would be like the ICPC World Finals from 2018. Now, similarly, there's some large competitions hosted by companies, like Google holds Google Code Jam every year, and similarly, Facebook holds the Facebook Hacker Cup. And if you're planning to get hired at one of these companies, performance in these competitions can really help you. It's also just quite fun as well. And then finally, too, we of course at MCP like to host small competitions for everyone to compete amongst themselves. And sometimes these competitions have prizes too. It can be good fun. This photo in the bottom right is from our tryouts last year. But even like aside from tryouts, even we hold like regular competitions on HackerRank, which everyone can participate on with like online. So I mentioned the ICPC competition. So I want to talk a bit more about that. So this is a huge competition. Like it's occurs worldwide, and over 50,000 students participate every year. Now it's also a bit of a weird competition in that students actually compete in teams of 3. So it's normally 3 students per team with 1 computer shared amongst them. So you have to get used to often either writing your solutions on paper or just working together on the same computer. Now, I will say for our tryouts are held individually, so you don't have to worry about finding a team. And the top 6 people from our tryouts will go on to form our 2 senior teams that we send to participate in regionals, and we participate in the ECNA regionals. Now, you'll notice that we also send a junior team. So from the remaining participants, we select the top 3 first and second years to be our junior team. So even if you're in first or second year and don't have that much experience with competitive programming yet, I highly encourage you to come out to tryouts. Although, you probably already noticed we will not be holding tryouts this semester. They'll actually be next semester this year. So normally, our ECNA regional that we participate in is in November. So we normally have tryouts in October. However, this year, due to COVID, tryouts have been delayed to March. Regionals have been delayed till March, so we won't be holding our tryouts until second semester. All right, so in terms of staying in the loop, the best way to stay in the loop is just to sign up for the MCP mailing list. Then you'll just get like an email notification whenever we have a new event or some like funky workshop. Although it certainly doesn't hurt to join the Facebook group, although I assume if you're reviewing this right now, you're probably already in the Facebook group. And we also have a Notion. Now I want to briefly take a look at our Notion because I think it's fairly handy. So on our Notion, sorry, it's loading for a second. Twiddle my thumbs. Okay, almost there. Okay, cool. So on our Notion, you can see our upcoming events. Like for instance here, you can see once this page loads, you can see our information sessions, and we'll be posting like more workshops shortly soon, like very soon. And we also have this training material. So around August of this year, we started rolling out training content to help people prepare for ICPC. So this is like fully, you can go at your own pace and like work through training content sort of thing. So it starts from the bare minimum of like setting up your programming environment and works through like basic data structures towards like more difficult concepts. And with that as well, we hold contests every Saturday. And we'll have one this Saturday, and our last one will be next Saturday, since we only have 2 weeks of content left. Cool. Yeah, so I highly recommend like checking some of this out and working through this. I'm always looking for feedback on this as well. But Since this started way back in August, many of you probably will not have had the chance to get into it. And it can be somewhat intimidating to work through this by yourself. So for that reason, if I go to my next slide here, we're actually planning on holding some like introductory workshops over the next few weeks. In particular, next Tuesday, so September 22nd, we're going to be holding a programming essentials workshop. So this will be broken into two 1-hour sessions. In one of those 1-hour sessions, we're going to go over how to set up a Python environment and work through some simple Python questions, like taking input and coming up with a solution. And in the other half of our workshop, we're going to go through setting up a C++ environment, solving some simple questions, and coming up with a solution. And it's unfortunate Michael's not here to talk about this, but we also in the works have a capture the flag competition. While it isn't strictly competitive programming, we think it's going to be good fun. Now, if you find this sort of thing interesting and you think you want to get more involved, we're actually currently looking for a VP internal and VP external, and you can apply it here. We're going to actually send a link to these slides after we finish the presentation, so stick around in the chat. And I have some final general advice before I send anyone off. So when people first get into competitive programming, it can be super intimidating, just because it has a steep learning curve. Like there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of initial concepts you need to learn. Like I think one of the specific examples for this is even like depth first search, right? If you don't have experience with graph theory or depth first search, that can be super intimidating at first. But once you get more familiar with the basic concepts, it gets easier and easier to work through these things. So I very much encourage people to stick with it, even if it seems like intimidating, or even if you can't fully understand the problems at first. To that end, if you're like super ambitious, you say, well, I want to do more, I want to be like super good. I can't recommend anything more than signing up for Code Forces. So this was one of those programming sites I mentioned earlier. It's based out of Russia. It's a bit hardcore, but it actually has a contest at a variety of levels. So they break up their competitions into Div 1, Div 2, and Div 3 levels, where Div 3 is the easiest, Div 2 is harder, and Div 1 is like ridiculously hard. But I highly recommend starting with some Div 3 or Div 2 contests, and they post full editorials after the contest, so it's really easy to try to solve these contests and upsolve questions later and really improve. And sorry, that's a fun jargon there. Upsolving refers to solving questions after the actual contest is ended. It's I guess it's the best way to improve. But above all else, competitive programming is meant to be like an enjoyable thing. Like it's not just like I guess the worst. I guess if I had to assign a bad way of looking at this, you could think of I'm going to learn competitive programming so I can get a job at some like big tech fund, and that's some big tech firm, and that's like the end of the end. But rather than that, I very much encourage you to have fun with competitive programming. I think it's like a really enjoyable thing to do, and I hope to see you guys in the future. So with that, that actually brings us to our question period. And while we do the question period, I will post a link to these slides in the chat, but you guys are free to ask questions. And you can also ask questions to Lucas and Michael, but they may have to either, I guess, relay their answer to me or say it in the chat. And so I'm just going to post that link right now. Oh, Daniel in the chat has a really good point. So I'm sure everyone can read the chat, but LeetCode also hosts contests, and they're a bit less intimidating. And I guess also more interview-oriented. All right, so I'm going to stick around for the next, I guess, like 20 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, like you're totally free to go. don't feel the need to stick around. But we can answer any of your questions. If you ask me anything, oh, there we go. Now we're getting a bunch of questions. Can I talk about the responsibility of their VP roles? I can. In fact, I think I actually have this written up somewhere. So if you go to our Get Involved tab, right here, you can see a detailed description of the rules. So let me scroll down to the bottom here. So VP internal is more like you're doing event planning. You're making sure like we actually are like keeping our Notion together and like managed. Uh, VP external is more like you're doing our social. You're helping with like social media stuff, like making sure our Facebook events are posted, talking with other clubs. Ooh, this is another really good question from Sheshays. Has competitive programming helped you in other areas of life apart from money jobs? I think I guess this is probably the most obvious answer, but competitive programming like the most fundamental thing you learn in competitive programming isn't like some like specific like computer algorithm or anything. It's very much just like how to problem solve and how to think about problems in general. So I feel like I've been able to think about I guess like anything in my life like much better having gone through competitive programming and really like problem solve. I don't know, think about things as they are, get better at like interpreting. Sorry. One thing I'll work Daniel's question into this too. The thing I like most about competitive programming is that with competitive programming problems, you sort of just get dropped into a completely new problem with no context, and you have to figure out how the rules in like that problem's world operate, and how within those rules you can make something happen that you want to happen. So similarly, you get really good in competitive programming at just adapting to like completely new rules and completely new scenarios and being able to figure out like how those things work. So I think it's really good for that. To answer both questions. Oh yeah, it's also it's super good for meeting like-minded people, especially for like networking purposes. Like for example, um, oh I don't know if I shouldn't flex. I'm currently interviewing with like Hudson River Trading, and the only reason I got that is because I had a referral from someone I met through competitive programming, right? Like everybody knows everybody in the competitive programming world, and it can really help you get jobs. And like similarly, even I don't know if it's still running this year, but in the Waterloo region, there's a contest that's normally hosted every year called Communitech Code to Win. I'm sure Daniel knows about this since he used to be the Communitech ambassador. But this competition would be held every year, and they take people from the competition and interview them for jobs in the Waterloo area. So there's things like that. So you can often just get a job like very directly from that, or just meet other people who would like to do this sort of thing. Yes. To add something else while I wait for more questions, another thing competitive programming really helps you with is this thing called yak shaving. Yak shaving is like the sort of thing where you try and accomplish something, and then you figure out that to accomplish that thing, you need to accomplish another thing, and you have to like follow the rabbit hole all the way down. So like if you ever need to like debug something in your life or like trace through exactly why something is the way it is, like all the way down, uh, the sort of skills you build in competitive programming are very helpful for that. Oh, it also helps you, I guess, if you ever have to take like any probability, like any courses in the future on like combinatorics or probability, you'll get very good at that. So that helps as well. Oh, I should mention too, all this entire presentation will be posted on the MCP channel like after this too. So if you missed anything or if you came here late, you can view it all then. And if you attended today's session, don't feel the need to attend tomorrow's session because we're going over like the exact same content. But both sessions will be posted. Ooh, yeah. So Daniel's also just like talking a bit more about how competitive programming can help you. Yeah, I guess that is sort of true. Competitive programming is really useful in terms of teaching you how to abstract problems. Like you can always just break things down. Oh, sorry. This is a very good question. Would you say ECE students are at a disadvantage? Not at all. Absolutely not at all. Um, so if you're in like software engineering, for example, you'll learn some of this competitive programming stuff in second year when you take your algorithms course. But our algorithms course we take in second year has like hardly any depth at all. Like you can learn like the sort of material that you need for competitive programming in our algorithms course in like a week or like less. Like I, like yeah. So Like you can definitely do it. Like you will like regardless of what programming you're regardless of what programming you're in, you will have to put in some time if you really want to improve at competitive programming. But I think it's totally worth it, and I think you're not at a disadvantage as an ECE person. Ooh, this is actually I'm really glad you asked that question. So for whatever reason, C++ is like sort of like the de facto language for competitive programming. But for the languages you can really use most of the time are Python, C++, or Java, since those are the three languages that are supported by like the ICPC competition. Technically, and sometimes they don't guarantee that problems are solvable in Python, but it's very, very rare for a problem not to work in Python. Like you can honestly solve like pretty much anything in Python, which Daniel can attest to. And let's see. Oh, so the nice thing is when you're teaming up with other students, even though you're on one computer, it's like there's nothing stopping you from like opening up multiple windows and all using like your own personal preference. Like if you really wanted to, you could have one guy doing Python, one guy doing C++, and one guy doing Java all on the same team. So really, I'd go with whatever like you're most comfortable with or whatever you want to learn the most. Uh, Personally, I'm biased towards Python and C++, although there is an argument for Java, and that Java has some really nice built-in libraries, especially for geometry stuff. Ooh, so I just got a question from Michael. Michael says, "What is my favorite language?" um, that's a good question. I'd have to say I'm sort of split. Originally, I was an all Python guy back in the day. I'd write all of my solutions in Python. I thought it was the cat's pajamas. But then I hit a point in HackerRank where you often couldn't get problems to pass using Python, at least not without doing some sketchy hacks. So then what would happen is I'd write a solution in Python, it would time out, and then I'd have to rewrite it in C++. And eventually I got to the point where I was writing every problem like once in Python and then again in C++. And so instead of doing that, I just started writing them directly in C++ and save the time. Ooh, okay, this is another really good question from Dean. So are there runtime constraints in competition? Uh, Very much so. So in a programming contest, like pretty much regardless of like what it's being hosted on, there's always a runtime and memory constraints. So typically your program will have about around 2 seconds to run. Um, and I forget the exact memory limit, but typically, if you run out of memory, you're also running out of runtime. So normally you don't have to worry too much about memory. But yeah, there's runtime constraints. So typically, it's normally really easy to come up with a brute force solution to solve a problem, but it's typically much harder to come up with an efficient solution to the problem that will pass within the runtime limit. Like a really good rule of thumb is if you're using C++, you can afford to run around 10 to the 8 operations. Like that's a rule of thumb some people will use. Oh, and sorry, Daniel's ranting a bit in the chat here. So yeah, Python can screw you a bit, especially at like the intermediate or advanced level. But you definitely don't see the limitations at the start. And like even if for advanced stuff, it's really useful in terms of like, so in languages like C++, you don't have a big integer class. Like you'd have to use your own sketchy one. But in Python, like integers can be arbitrarily large, which makes like math questions and things like really easy, which is great. So what are some downsides to Python? That's a good question from Michael. Um, So Python it is a bit slower. So Python itself is honestly like maybe like 10 to 100 times slower. However, there's a fancy like Python. It's like a just-in-time compiler thing called PyPy or PyPy, and most competitions will actually run your code with PyPy. So your code can run in like even if you're writing Python, it normally runs in somewhat comparable time to C++, but it's still slower. Especially if I find recursion can really kill you in Python, even when you're using PyPy. So you have to be careful with that. Yeah, yeah. Our Daniel, who was the previous MCP president, is currently going through the transition from Python to C++, and I've heard no end of that. Uh, but that's an adventure. Yeah, honestly, C++ seems intimidating to learn at first because it's like the libraries and like all the built-in stuff in C++. There's like so much of it, right? Like it's too much for any one person to know. But you really don't need to know that much of it to actually do competitive programming, or even if I mean, depending on what you're doing in industry, you don't need to know like all of C++. Like for competitive programming, all you really need to know is how to use like the standard libraries, like how to use like vectors and sets and maps. And like if you know how to use those and how to use big arrays and like a few other quirks, then you're pretty much ready to use C++. Like it's not that bad to learn. Oh, Daniel Wolf's pointing out another really annoying thing. So in Python, especially in Python 3, they made it worse in Python 3. There's actually a recursion limit. So if you go past a certain recursion depth in Python, so let's say uh I forget the I forget the exact depth, but let's say it was 100 for example. If I had a function call itself 100 times in Python, then it would just block itself and say, oh, we hit recursion limit, you can't go any deeper, and you have to manually go and like call this special command to increase the recursion limit if you want to do that sort of thing in Python, which can lead to like all sorts of confusion when you can't understand why your solution isn't working. So that's really annoying, and that's not a thing in C++. But that's something to keep in mind if you're doing Python. Um, oh, Dean says, can I link the notion in the chat? I can, Dean. I will do that for you right now. Oh, you did already? All right, Michael's already on top of things. Oh, sorry, and I also got a question from Michael, and he says, will there be a Java workshop? There may be a Java workshop, although I will not be teaching it because I'm awful at Java, but we'll see. And oh, and I see Dean. Dean likes that ordered map. Yeah, an ordered map game. Let's go. So for anyone who's not familiar with some of the C++ data structures, so map in C++ is a data structure that maps a key to a value. So it's very similar to a dictionary in Python. But internally in C++, it's actually using a binary search tree to store that map. However, if you use unordered map, it's instead using a hash table internally. So queries will take O1 instead of O log n, which is what the binary search tree would take. So it's much faster. Nice. Oh, nice. Now I believe. Wait, Michael, did you link the notion in the chat? I don't see it. I must be. Oh, wait, you linked it in the Hangout in the Meet chat, YouTube chat. Yeah, no, I see your other messages. Wait, do other people see this notion link? Maybe I'm blind. I'll just resend it. Yeah. Worst case, we have it twice. There we go. Oh yeah, also I apologize to everyone you guys couldn't hear Lucas and Michael. We're doing this again tomorrow, so I don't know if you guys really want to hear Lucas and Michael. They will be hearable or like audible tomorrow. I, Daniel points out I dropped a bunch of algo jargon. Yeah. So this is another thing. I mentioned earlier that competitive programming has a steep learning curve. I feel like half of that is just there's a bunch of competitive programming jargon, and people who do competitive programming are really bad at using competitive programming jargon without realizing that it's jargon. So do call me out on that. But also if anything doesn't make sense, feel free to like ask me things. Oh yeah, there's like a very large delay. I need one of those like streamer things where I have like my version of the chat like live imposed on my screen, but I'm not that much of a streamer yet. But we could do, although my internet's like pretty bad, which is like half the reason I'm doing this delay too. I think I don't have that much upload. Oh yeah. Oh, so it probably sounds weird to people in the chat because I'm talking to Michael right now, so you probably hear my end of my conversation with Michael. I apologize for that. Oh yes, sorry. So I got another question from a Hong Sung Park. Do you like to use STL or use your own design container? Oh, Hong, I always just use STL. Like I don't have the time to go make my own containers. Like even in competitive programming, I find it's rare for me to even make like structs or even like classes. Like you really need it. Like if I need to store like some like let's say I need to store like a pair or something, I might even just use like I'll use like the built-in STV pair or use like a big like tuple or something if I have to store a bunch of information. Because like I don't want to spend the time writing my own container. And like the standard library is pretty much everything I'd want. The one exception to that, probably, that I can think of right off the top of my head, is sometimes I need to implement a try, and I will implement my own try. Oh, yes, that's true. So Lucas points out, you guys can't hear Lucas, but Lucas points out, uh, sorry, that when you implement union find, you normally do that fully yourself too, and that's like, I guess, your own sort of container data structure. Bigint? Oh, sorry. So advice for Bigint in C++? Just like don't give up. Go to Python. It's not worth it. The alternative is you can find Bigint libraries online. If you want to stick in C++ and do Bigint, you can Google around for a Bigint library and you can just copy and paste it into your code. That's like a standard thing to do. But I think that's just like gross. I'd rather just use Python for those questions most of the time. Oh, and Daniel compliments our Notion. Thank you. Oh, what is it, Michael? Oh, course type website for getting started in competitive programming. That is a really good question, Michael. Ooh. Oh, USACO? Okay, so actually, so if you're really gung ho, I said you should sign up for Code Forces, which was like this site. But if you're even like more gung ho, like you're like I'm doing all my Code Forces contests, but I want even more. I have like super duper duper gung ho. Then I recommend there's this site called USACO, and it's technically like a training site for US like high schoolers, but it's for like the highest level of competition for high schoolers. So it's like pretty much like ICPC level questions, and it's just like a bunch of like different chapters of questions, like going from the basics, moving on to harder stuff. And I don't know, it's pretty good. It's a lot of questions, and they have like some like text sections too, like explaining concepts. I recommend it. You can see here I'm like very close to finishing it. I'm on like the last 10 questions, but I've been stuck on one for a while. uh, so you see, Daniel in the chat points out it just says define int long without any context. So I do like a really like bastardized awful thing in my C++ where so in C++, the normal data type you use to store integer values is just the int data type, and that can store values up to around 10 to the 9. But sometimes you need to store larger values that can be up to around 10 to the 18. And for those things, you normally want to use long. But it would really suck to write long everywhere in your code. So what most people do is they go define like LL as long, and then they just type LL everywhere instead of int. But I don't even want to do that. I'd rather just like write int everywhere and have those ints be bigger. So what I do is I'm a horrible person and I just do define int long, and it works perfectly and it's great. And yeah, no shame. And also, since the page is loaded, this is Code Forces, which I was referring to. If you sign up for Code Forces, it's not very active, but you should very much do this McMaster University group. So you can see like people from McMaster have been competing. It's kind of fun. It's not been that active lately, but I recommend it. But sorry, to find like new contests on Code Forces, you just go to this contest tab, and you can see like upcoming like Div 2s, Div 1s, and like Div 3s, and like here you can see like past contests, or you can even like go in, look at questions, try rating them. Yeah. Cool. I'll stick around for 6 more minutes. If you guys have like any like last minute questions, I guess this is a very good time. I also apologize. I think the stream's a bit laggy. I don't know why. We'll see if we can figure that out a bit better for tomorrow as well. Alright, calling it now. Do we have any last minute questions? I'll give like maybe like 30 seconds, and then if we don't get anything, I will end the stream. Let's see. There's a bit of a stream delay, so wait a bit longer for it to get to you guys. Okay. Do you prefer HackerRank or LeetCode? Quite honestly, at this point, I hate them both. I'm gonna sound super cynical. So back in the day, I used to love HackerRank because HackerRank used to have this thing called Week of Code, where it would be a week-long contest. So you have like the entire week to work on problems, and so if you don't know something, you can go and like search and research and get better. So I really like that. But nowadays, like HackerRank's kind of gone like full corporate, and they don't have any contests anymore. They just try and make money. Yeah, it's pretty garbage. No, LeetCode actually, I guess LeetCode is much better now. LeetCode has like weekly contests, so in that regard, LeetCode's like just better. Yeah, it is really sad. If you for a while, I looked into it, and you could see like every like few months, like the number of contests would go down and down and down, and then eventually they just stopped putting out contests. They like fully sold their soul. Yeah, it was really sad. Yeah, back in the day, it used to be like me, Daniel, Tommy, some other guys, just like grinding out week of codes. That's like ye olden days. CP. It's classic. But yeah, leak code contests are good. Code Forces contests are really good. There's also sites like @Coder is really good. There's also like Top Coder and everything too. I just like Code Forces because they've got like the Div 1, Div 2, Div 3. So you can always do something like right at your level. There's also like, yeah, the delay's pretty crazy, as Michael says. Um, you can also you can see all the past like if you go to this like this site called Caddis, you can see all the past ICPCs that we compete in. Like we compete. This was like the standings from like last year, for example. You can see these, and you can like walk through all the problems. It's sort of fun. So if you so we compete in the East Central North America region, but within that there's like specific sites that you can write at. And typically at our site, what happens is it's like all the Waterloo guys, and then like a mix of like us, the U of T guys, and then just like other people. But you'll notice there's 4 Waterloo teams. It's kind of funny. Back in the day, there actually used to be 5 Waterloo teams, and then the joke is, one year the 5th Waterloo team got 6th place, and now they have 4 Waterloo teams, which is how we got here. But I'll post a link to this too if anyone wants to take a look at these past Caddis standings. Oh, he does. Then can you suggest something else? Okay, actually, I'll give a full list of suggestions in the chat right now. Uh, the best one by far is Code Forces. They have like Discords and things associated with it too, so you can talk to people. It's like really good. After that, ooh, like if you're just going purely competitive programming, oh yeah, Code Forces maybe, @Coder, yeah, Lead Coach for interview stuff. I'm tempted. I'm tempted to say Caddis. Caddis has good questions, but they don't have contests really, at least not regularly. But those guys are all pretty good. And like yeah, LeetCode will be the most direct like actual interview questions. So if you're looking to do interview questions, that's the best place to go by far. Yeah, you will literally be asked like verbatim LeetCode questions. So if you do the most common LeetCode questions, it really helps you out.